is everybody around? So we probably need to keep.
And the board meeting will need to start at 2:30.
Yeah, because we have to end at 2:30.
Do you know what time it's going to end today? That's what I thought. I was planning to leave by 3.
Yeah, so I did too, so I mean, as long as.
All of the other members are coming?
Yeah.
All right, well, we'll finish promptly at 2:30. Okay, boys and girls, we have an option for processing at this point. We have one.
Can we move that picture? Those guys are making me nervous. Someone's gonna fall.
Where's our clicker?
I don't wanna watch.
All right, okay, all right, here's the deal. We have some options. We have one solid objective under learning, which, we will write up and send out to you, but it's basically by, we said 2020, graduate with proficiency, college and career readiness as measured by state tests. And then what we'll do is we'll put the Lexile scores in, as I was sharing with some of you guys. We'll put the Lexile scores in as the data pieces to be collected at certain points in that process, and that will become our measuring stick. That'll be our leading, lagging indicator piece to get there. Now, the question is this. Do you, as a team, do you want to continue to dig on the learning one to try to define some core elements there? Or do you want to try to come up with a solid one under stakeholders and a solid one under goal 2, which is the human resource one, or in this case, educational leader one? I keep saying that, educational leader one. Do you want to have one solid one under each one as exemplars to give to the committee when they, the next meeting we have where we have the goal teams come in? Or do you want to keep digging on this one for a while? Yes, sir.
I have 2 things I'd like real quickly to be up.
No, go ahead. No.
And that's graduation rate without waiver.
Okay. That's a good one to write a goal around. Objective.
I'm interested in attendance. Sounds like an input, but actually it tells you something about the holistic environment there. I've often been amazed by this, especially a student that lives in but if you have a beautiful building that's warm and cool, has free food, and loving people, you're going to want to be there.
Yeah.
And plus, then they give you goals and objectives, and you're making progress towards something bigger in your life. So I think attendance speaks quite a bit. It will even give you a free ride. So I think attendance in all the takeover schools, the attendance rates were abominable, but I understood why when I visited.
Yeah, I got it.
Okay, so I think I'd like to know what we're doing in attendance. Are those 2?
Sure.
And attendance we could look at attendance too as a data element under graduation rate. It's one thing you could do, or you could simply use it as a separate one because you want to highlight it. That's really just preference at your point, because elementary folks usually don't think about their role in graduation rate. They think that's a high school objective. Of course, the reality is if you don't master elementary successfully, your graduation numbers are going to drop way off. So again, how you structure that, it is. So my point being that you could decide to make attendance as a set of as a set of indicators leading to graduation rate to show that connection if you choose, but that's up to you. All right. Anybody else want to throw up some, in this case, these would be topics that you would write objectives under here?
I think we need one for the assessment component of the standards we adopt. Right now we're using ISTEP, but whatever the state instrument's going to be, if we're going to have Indiana standards versus Common Core standards, I think we need one on the assessment component of that. How are we going to assess learners on their attainment of the standards?
Okay, so you're going to set an objective, which would be by this date, you can have this level of performance on this assessment, whatever that assessment is. And those things, do you have a timeline for when those decisions will be made? Do you know when those
I'm just putting it out there
No,
for now.
I'm just asking that just for information. Is there a timeline for when, like, these?
I
There
see it
is.
being phased in,
Oh, okay,
phased in over years.
yeah.
Absolutely. Right. Absolutely. We're just brainstorming, right?
No,
We're
we
not
are right
doing
now.
details, so I just wanted to get it out there so.
I
it doesn't get
agree, but
lost.
I'd like to put it underneath there, I'm assuming.
No, I was going to echo the same thing. I think the challenge we're going to have is, you know, so we could adopt these college career-ready standards, is how do we toggle that between that and making sure that we can also norm that out to a national level where we know that we can't claim to be a national education leader unless we have some kind of.
Well, when you do college, if you write something that's college career standards you're writing assessment or accountability measures for college career standards. That's your goal. You're going to put the definitions. Under that, your metrics could be everything from percent of kids to score a certain level on AP or IB. You could put NAEP in there if you wanted to get an international or national international thing. You know, what so far, this one goes to proficiency in reading, but if you wanted to shoot for the top end of those scales, there are other metrics that you'd look at, as you know.
And you're saying it doesn't have to be one.
Oh, it can't be one,
Right,
I don't
so
think.
I think we need to be looking at multiple indicators
Well-
on several of these.
So, exactly right. We were just sharing at the break that when you look at this one right here, it's one objective, but you're going to want to do dipstick checks at a variety of places throughout your system. And you could use one literacy measure, or you could use multiple literacy measures. That would be your choice. Same thing when you go for the standards. You could use one measure, or you could use multiple standards. And I would think clearly when you get to the idea of reaching the top end, you've got a lot of ways right now already in place with your AP and IB and your other things like that that you could use to do that. So,
I think I don't see up there, and I would be,
okay.
I suppose if there's a special educator sitting in the room, we're talking about students probably at normal cognitive function.
Or gifted.
Or
Would you include gifted?
Yeah, any exceptional learners we haven't really addressed.
Now, and again, another thing you'd be thinking about too is exceptional. Are the goals different, or do you want to track their progress towards the goals? You follow what I'm saying? In other words, you're not going to want to set a different graduation rate, or you're not going to want to set a different reading rate.
So literacy focus,
But the focus is going to be the differentiation by subgroups. So when you all start putting down the ways you're going to measure these, when you start saying, okay, we're going to measure this by ethnicity or by and other subgroups as defined by law or whatever, then you're going to get at the economic disadvantagement. You're going to get at the special needs kids and all of that. So those will play out unless you specifically choose to set a different goal target, for that.
By the way, that'll all lace into assessment. I think
Correct.
something we all agree on is, educators will certainly say this, for them to take us seriously, have to measure growth.
Yeah.
Growth, that's a big-time victory, we have to be able to recognize.
Also, a second part of that, growth's important, but also competency at some level. You can continue to grow every year and never meet the competence level, so it's that balance.
And the good news is it doesn't have to be an either or.
No, it's gotta be both.
Matter of fact, a full-blown assessment system could be both and. So I'm going to look at both your achievement. It's almost like the whole thing with they used to do the games they used to play with SAT scores. If I'm going to look at SAT scores without looking at SAT participation, I can raise your scores 20 points in a heartbeat. I'm just going to cut these kids out from taking the test. So the real reality is if you really want to see whether you're making progress, you got to look at participation rate and performance. And I think that's what you're saying. Growth is the other side of the measure. But again, now we're beginning to talk about the metrics. And that's where we get to leading and lagging indicators. That's going to all flesh out. And that's where your values, what we talk about is, that's where you see an organization's values is not necessarily just here, but you see their values when they say, well, what data do I want to look at, and what am I going to hold people accountable for? And that's also when they see what you're holding them accountable for, collecting the data, that will drive the change in practice, because they're going to want.
Speaking of values, I really value educational leaders. Can we talk about some objectives?
Okay,
under
let's do
there?
that. All right. What a segue.
Transition.
What a segue. It's almost like we suggested going on to there about 20 minutes ago. All right, let's go over there. Yes, ma'am.
I have a how that I need some help
Okay.
putting into a what as well, but one of my,
Wow.
We can bring a counselor in for you.
it's a personal problem. One of my biggest disappointments is the kind of dissolution of the mentor program in Indiana. That lends highly to the amount of teachers we have quitting in their first, I would like to see some goal put in there, or some objective put in there that lends itself to better pairing up and monitoring of a mentor program within schools for new teachers.
And so you understand that that might be an actual strategy.
Right,
but,
so that's why
under- yeah, okay.
it's a how,
That's a
but I want to find a
So
what
you,
to put it
all right,
under.
just follow that logic. That's going to help us. If you had really excellent mentor programs in place in all your buildings, what metric would that impact? What would be the outcome?
Retention
So,
of,
yeah, recruitment and retention.
So that's where I'm going. So the point being, that's a good idea, and so write that down. Make sure we don't forget it
Part
under
of
the
that could
strategy.
be our work at higher ed too. How are we
That's where I was
preparing
gonna go.
teachers?
Right.
And look at that, because if they're leaving, then we can look at what, it could be around the quality of principal. I mean, I've had some very bright young people that could do, they complain about the system, so to speak. Now, they might be wrong. This is anecdotal.
Well, we're having conversation at a variety of levels with accountability for teacher preparation.
Right.
And what does that look like in higher education accountability? And so the mentoring funds went away. So they no longer exist for schools to put programs in place. And some of that requires releasing of teachers, requires some things that schools can't necessarily get accomplished. But on the other end, since you mentioned higher education, I don't know that we shouldn't at what are the responsibilities and what coursework do. Graduation isn't the end. Maybe there's a course that you take in your first year that's required.
Yep.
And the higher education has a vested interest in mentoring that person, those brand-new teachers and brand-new principals that first year. That makes accountability work.
Absolutely.
Because you don't want to put people in the classroom that aren't going to be good.
Right, so you're talking about an induction program.
Correct.
And an induction program.
run through a higher
jointly-
education
Right,
program.
from,
You're into strategies now.
I know
Okay.
we are. I know we are.
What I'm saying is, all right, if you had that program, Glenn, that's a great comment, just like the one over here on mentoring. If you had that program,
recruitment and retention.
what would the metrics say that got better? So you want to say that 5 years from now, because we have all these good new programs in place, what metric's going to change? That's what we want to put up here. 5 years from now, we want to decrease the, I sort of say dropout rate of a professional, but it's not that.
You wanna-
Increase retention
Increase the retention rate
of new teachers.
of new teachers by whatever margin,
percent.
by this date. Now, that's going to be the objective, and then the strategies are going to be this better mentoring, this kind of college, the university connection, all that, as your strategy, yeah.
By the way,
Well,
this
yeah.
objective, if we were going to reduce or increase 5-year retention, I want to study the premise very carefully, because I want to see who leaves and why. Like, some of this leaving is good because they thought they wanted to teach. I'd want to peel it back very carefully.
And you might, one of your strategies.
Make sure that we don't want some movement in that first 5 years.
right.
And one of your first strategies, as we start talking about strategies, could be actually collecting on
Why?
people exiting the profession. Because what you want to impact to change that is the ones you could and should have impacted, not the ones, because some of them are you going to lose just because spouses move, they're military affiliated.
We moving,
But there should be, but that's easy to get data through an exit survey.
That's it.
So, and sometimes the exit survey, has bearing on just pay, like literally. So when you first come into the teaching and you're a needs improvement teacher, you should have mentoring, and that should be expected, actually, that you're not effective and highly effective day one when you walk into the classroom. But that's what our law says now. You don't get a pay increase unless you're effective and highly effective. There's nothing in there.
They leave is because they're dissatisfied with pay, again, that's a whole nother issue than the fact that
They
they.
didn't get support, they didn't get
Correct.
mentoring, they didn't get.
So those are strategies. So what we're going to be looking at, our first, one objective, wanted to actually write this, would be by some date future, we will increase the retention rate of all
New
Or
teachers.
newly inducted teachers, or,
the retention rate of teachers by whatever number, whatever percent. Now, again, that would be driven by where you are right now. And
A 10%
Assuming we
increase
want
over
to.
the
Right.
base.
I think we need to be careful too, and that's why the exit interview is a good point, because at the same time, whereas I feel this is absolutely paramount, I also don't want to create a situation where districts are keeping ineffective teachers because they want their data to look better on.
so you might have to word this with a qualifier.
So we're gonna say effective.
Yeah.
And was there a 5-year?
It was thrown out there.
It was thrown out there.
So a way you would qualify teachers here, so that you got at the issue you guys are mentioning, not the ones that should be leaving, but the others. How could you qualify teachers to get it?
We may want to just increase effective teacher retention rate and then study it before we make any moves. It may be the case in the first 5 years, what looks bad is good, or what looks bad is real bad, or whatever. I'm not sure we know. I want to be very careful. I don't know. Maybe somebody, I'm sure someone else knows.
Have the discussion around, because
Effectiveness ratings for the teacher preparation programs too, I think somehow, I know this is going to be evolving, but we're going to have a way eventually at some point to write an objective, and I think quality of educational leaders, you got to look at requirements that require us to look at something. We may not be able to nail that down, but they're talking about an 8F system. Possibility that an objective may be, how do we not leave out looking at teacher preparation?
Always got to study the pipeline.
Right, I mean, you have to. And when I was on the Professional Standards Advisory Board, it used to drive me crazy because we would go advisory board about reapproving state accreditation. And 13, 14 AFIs, and I'm going, why are we? Got to have something on there to look at that.
well, and
Absolutely.
maybe that in itself is a good goal. Actually having a system in place, because we're going to have to do that anyhow. We're going to be
Exactly.
charged with doing a system. But maybe, get it in there. We don't know all the components that need to be measured yet. Part of the issue.
Right.
how would you quantify, how would you capture that, just so we don't lose it?
Accountability system for higher ed. It's some kind of an accountability system for higher ed.
For teacher preparation.
For teacher
It's an
preparation.
accountability system for teacher preparation. That has to be developed, and, when we get that developed, we're going to have some metrics, I'm sure, that we're going to be looking at. It's how we get there, it's how you put that together that has any meaningful,
We don't have to do that today. We just don't want to
No.
lose it.
correct.
Right.
Correct.
Some team will have, the goal team will have this one on, so develop.
This will be what I would point to. Ultimately, though, it seems to me
I would say no.
Sarah mentioned long ago about instructional leaders, having the pedagogy, being able to know that you've got great teachers in your building and what that looks like. And we haven't, I think something written around pedagogy, through that kind of work, maybe it's school improvement that we measure it through, but I think you got to have something on there about practices and pedagogy know that you have effective leaders
Yeah,
in your building.
I was going to suggest even broader than that, just to have a placeholder about the educational leader's responsibility to have a quality school. And what you're saying, Glenda, would be part of that, but there might be other factors beyond school improvement, for example. Does that make sense?
I was thinking beyond just the leaders of the building. I was thinking everybody. That
Okay.
pedagogy is, we all have a place in it. And what does it look like, and how can we make that happen? And it takes a good leader to make sure all that's coming together. I think we could identify some things with practice. Well, we hit on it earlier when we talked about having critical thinkers, critical readers. You know, we're not necessarily, we haven't necessarily been in the mode to really do in-depth writing, in-depth reading, in-depth analysis in science, in-depth, you know, we've been doing what I consider surface teaching. That's pretty easy to do, but really training people to get kids to really take ownership for their learning, really get into the critical issues and the reading that's involved and the writing that needs to go along with it, and problem solving. And so I guess I'm talking about a shift.
Yeah, paradigm shift to higher order.
A shift to
instructional
higher order,
practice.
yeah.
What if we instead looked at it from an angle of professional development opportunities provided
Yes.
aligned with our learning objectives?
Those
And
would be
that,
some
again,
strategies.
ties-
Right.
Yeah, you all hit
Yep.
a lot of strategies, and the
Yep.
idea would be, let's just simply
Of problem solving, critical thinking, all that, getting kids to think, what would be the outcome metrics that we'd see, you know?
I'd be comfortable, and it's not easy across the board, but you can do it for most situations. I'd be comfortable, for instance, I've been on both sides of the fence. I think that we have to have an objective about measuring and increasing effectiveness, helping students. So if my teacher prep program, say they want to evaluate it, how effective were my teachers at helping students grow academically towards the standards? That's a core competency that they have to do. So if they would go into, like many of them do, urban schools here in Indy, I don't want to just judge them against. But I would like, and I think we can do it, I think we get the data by and large, grow more than 1 year under their tutelage in reading. I think a key objective we have to here is to have educational leaders, that would include teachers, principals, accountable for advancing students. Value-add proposition.
You're in a value-added model. I don't know, do you all have designs as you move forward?
Well, you incorporate that in
No.
when you do the RISE. Well, I don't have the RISE right in front of me.
Oh,
Looking
that,
at the achievement piece, I mean,
Yeah.
inside of RISE, it looks at,
well, no, that's required by law, that we
Sure.
have, that teachers be evaluated by student growth measures.
Yeah,
So
so it's got to be
that's-
one of our objectives, I would think.
That's already in there. The issue,
Well, I
What's it
want it
say
as
up
an
there?
objective, because to me,
Extrapolate
at the
that
end of the
data
day, if you're given a group of students, tax money to educate them, whether you're teaching, add value, if you want to use that term. Growth, in other words, we have something in our mission and vision about expand a student's talent.
we can only do that for a certain population of the teachers.
Assessment model, value-added
Well,
model.
at any time, because we only assess, you know, so in certain grade
You don't have
levels.
it for guidance counselors, you don't have it for librarians.
Right,
You don't have it
well,
for
many
non-core-
areas.
well, you really don't have it for your non-core areas.
Correct, many areas, really just language, arts, and math.
Not only that, but there's a lot of latitude in what you choose to measure as your
Sure.
individual. I mean,
I don't
everyone's
know
setting
that
their
we
own
could-
individual.
I don't know as a
with
state that
guidance
we
from
would be
leadership.
able to
but-
effectively measure that.
SLTs?
Yes.
I don't know, it's hard work, but I'd be very interested in that. See, that's the bottom line as an educator. What walks through that door?
Now, what we could do, let me take it from a different paradigm, Dan. If we actually, because we're going to be able to measure student growth in two ways. We're going to be able to see category growth, and we're going to be able to see if they meet their own trajectory lines. So we're going to have a lot of growth information, which we've never had before in that kind of. So if that's an outcome, and we want to see the improvement of growth, then leadership and pedagogy and those types of things, I'm thinking in another whole shift. If we actually look and have a goal about growth, then the components underneath it then relate to the pedagogical and the leadership qualities that are needed to get that achieved.
Sure.
Because to me, it's about putting things in place that make that happen and improve that. So we will have substantial data on growth. Actually, we'll have some baseline to look at here really soon because we're figuring all of these out, with our current assessment pieces. So we will have the capability to do that. So if we made a measurable goal in the growth of students, in their achievement, then we can tie the leadership pieces underneath that quite nicely, probably. The reverse would be almost impossible because we don't have a uniform measure to say that teachers have to measure a year and a half, because we just don't have it for everybody.
Yeah, there's a lot of teachers, and many states are struggling with the value-added model and the fact that other than SLTs or SLOs, depending on whichever you use SLTs or SLOs, SLOs. Well, most of the places use SLOs as the only measure for people in non-core areas because they have nothing else. They have no test, so they use SLOs. And those,
A group
well,
of students you identify.
and they get they're very weak in most cases that we've seen. Those really don't give you any hard data. The problem then becomes when you get into the elementary is pretty easy because you got one group of kids most all day and you control them. When you get to middle and high school, and then I've got 5 teachers, that work with me during the day, then assigning accountability for the growth becomes a little more problematic, unless I'm teaching a course just like algebra and all I'm going to measure is algebra. But when
This objective isn't my only objective, and
It's a
you're
good
going to be, you're going to be some limits, and there's
Yeah.
going to be unique ways, but where you can,
I like it.
that it sure.
Yeah,
I like it.
I'd like to put up there a growth measure.
No, I like it. If without a growth measure, I think it's really hard to do. You can't just do proficiency.
Maybe we're going to
Yeah.
do it in certain areas,
Yeah,
and
right.
not all of them, okay.
Right?
But
And it could be in your core areas, but that's okay. There's nothing wrong with that. A goal doesn't have to be everybody. It can be targeted
our
groups.
core areas, and
Yeah. All right. Okay, anything else up here? This is a member on the educational leaders piece. You mentioned professional development a minute ago, Sarah. That's an input yeah, I know, but I don't know. Right, with learning outcomes, yeah. Because, are there certain training, are there certain things you could do in service? You talked about pre-service, but are there any things in the in-service that you could tie to outcomes that would show effectiveness,
The ultimate goal is highly effective.
Yeah.
And as we're taking notes, the first grade teacher, how well there's principles, boards of education, and it's pretty clear that if you define yourself as an instructional leader and you put in good systems and processes, every class, every day, there's a clear learning objective, we have a clear strategy, we have cognitive assessments and affective assessments, and we know. Guess what? So it puts a big responsibility on leadership. It's not easy, it's awful hard work, but as a state, if we said, but listen, my friends,
Right.
come out of Chicago to here. If we're gonna get that, Arnie Duncan was in the paper about what it really takes. Any place where there's leadership, any place where growth has gone, there's bold leadership that tells the truth and follows, I'm supposed to talk, and follows through. So this educational measure of growth would be for a lot of people at a lot of levels in the system, and they couldn't just pan it off on bad weather or whatever. And if we were all collectively taking responsibility for that in how we design in-service and hold each other accountable, et cetera, we'd really have something. So if you look at what's going on here, that's a big deal.
Oh, go ahead.
I'm going to add one.
Head away.
The things we have up there really address, a lot of them address the initial preparation of teachers. I've been doing a little studying on Finland. This has been interesting to see how they did since they've been in the news a lot. And it's fascinating. They've gone to a model where everybody has to get a master's degree. And I'm not advocating that. I'm just saying, what do we do? How do we set an objective that encourages teachers to continue their training, whether it be going after national board professional certification or going back for an advanced degree? And the reason I raise that is just myself. When you come back for an advanced degree, you've probably had at least 1 or 2 years of experience under your belt. So you've got a context and a knowledge base, experiential base you didn't have when you went through your initial program. In the current system, when we went to the current evaluation system, because there is no longer a guaranteed pay differential, I can tell you, not just in our university, but in all the universities, those numbers are basically gone. And I don't blame the teachers. They're looking at it and they're going, if it's a financial decision. What I worry about is what we know about what causes a teacher to change practice. And usually the reason they change is because they've had the current assumptions they hold about teaching and learning challenged with new assumptions. Now, you could argue and say, well, that happens through professional development. It's true, but what I have seen is that our professional development tends to be sporadic, and it varies greatly across the state by local district and local school leaders. And I'm just concerned with that. I would like to see an objective where we talk about how do we meaningfully encourage teachers down a path towards additional certification or training or something where they are becoming a teacher leader in their building and they're able to model those pedagogical
How would you write
practices.
an objective?
Yeah, let me add to that. I think, higher education, is going to start thinking out of the box here with master's degrees not being to go towards certifications. I can see teachers who have gotten an evaluation with class, poorly rated in the area of classroom management, being able to go back to higher education and actually taking courses and getting a certification on classroom management to say, look, here's what I'm good with now, and here's how I've incorporated it, and here's how it's being used. And more of a certification process. But I also, since you mentioned National Board Certification, if I had my druther, every single teacher coming out of preparation would know they are headed towards that is part of what they're expected to do, is to become nationally board certified. And you're starting on your path, and we teach in that reflective manner, and we always are, we're keeping all of the highest standards in mind as we actually go. Now, that's something that's measurable. We have 159 national board certified teachers in Indiana. It's pathetic. And we don't
What's measurable?
we don't promote it. Well, increasing the number of national board certified teachers, that's what's measurable right off the start.
So the assumption is then if you have that certification, the students are going to learn more.
The students are learning more.
And I'm leaving open the possibility too. We may have
Well,
to.
you know that for a fact.
Oh, there's already been some studies done of national board certified teachers.
Well, then I would take and write, and I'm asking that question so we get an objective here. Maybe what this state board ought to do is set a policy that we put in a system that gives clear evaluation by improvement of student learning outcomes, and we will only invest in professional development and advanced degrees that advance learning of students. And then that way, if certification is the best way to go, I'd say pour our money in it. If targeted professional development over a long period of time produces results, let's pour our money in it. But we've poured tons of money in this state in master's degrees or whatever, which is fine. I mean, that's good for us in my daytime job. But what we probably ought to do is link it to effectiveness in driving student learning. And if we did that, then we would say that's where we'll invest that's where we'll make our investments to programs that are willing to be evaluated based on that. So if National Board Certified teachers get these unbelievable learning results, I'd say, well, that'd be a pretty good place to go.
I'd agree with that. And I don't know that I can fully define it today. I'm just saying that it seems to me countries that are seeing gains, that's something they're looking at, is they're saying, we've got all these teachers already in the field. How do you continue to improve their effectiveness? And what new knowledge do you add to that? There are some states like Kentucky that have gone to a rank system. There are some states that have gone to doing it through licensure and levels of licensure. We used to do that here in Indiana. I used to professionalize your licensing. You got a certain degree. I don't know, but when we got into this notion of moving away from the differential, I understand why we did that, to go to pay by performance, and I supported that. But I also have to acknowledge that it concerns me because we're seeing fewer teachers go on and continue in a meaningful, deliberate way, and we keep losing a lot of teachers to retirement or they leave the profession. And I'm going, how do you begin to replace that? Most teachers that come into the profession with the initial training are not going to teach at that master level where they're able to model that pedagogical and multiply that in others. And this gets into the whole mentoring thing, because how do you then select who your mentors are going to be? I mean, so I don't know how to write it yet. I don't know how to box it in. I don't side of it that somehow under this quality educational leaders, not just your pipeline of initial, but what are you doing?
So Brad, is the principle then lifelong learning, is what you're saying?
Absolutely.
Of all teachers? And that may lead us to a strategy of looking at the certification requirements, that every so many years there's a recertification process in which they have to demonstrate
We have
certain
that,
kinds of.
5 years.
Right, but it's not exactly linked to quality
You can get,
that I hear
you can get
Dan
90
talking
points
about.
any way you want.
Right, so it could be anything, and it could
Sorry,
have
you just
no
came in.
relationship on learning.
Right.
And so there's various ways to get at it, but I like Dan's notion that there's an
intentionality.
accountability
Yes.
there, that somehow it's just not the fly-by-night van that pulls up in front of your school. Let's do some professional
Let's do a
development.
little, get you
It's
some online
systematic.
credits here easy and.
It's systematic, and it's programmatic. This notion that you go here, there, and everywhere and just do a one sliver thing and that's going to improve teaching, that doesn't make sense. So that leads me to think it has to be more of a program rather than a slew of a course here,
Yeah.
a course there, a course everywhere.
I really appreciate this discussion, because it does lead us back to, as a state, our role could be in helping principals and superintendents, and really the whole state. We should not be pouring money. We should pour a lot of money in the professional development of our educators. But we should know we're making, so who's helping a principal understand, say you come, teacher, Harvey's my teacher, and says, I'm going to do this program. Who's helping us understand what's most effective? I'm going to take 3 online courses from somebody in South Dakota, and I want to get paid more for it, and you're going to pay the bill. I'd like, is there a way in which we could have an objective where we help principals and teachers and superintendents and boards and the state understand what professional development by evaluation advances learning most effectively? And so that information, because at the end of the day, these teachers and principals and superintendents all are accountable for student learning in our first goal. And I think they're going to make logical choices if they have good info. So we might need an objective on just helping folks understand, where do you make your investment? And Superintendent, you're right. The higher ed is going to look more at a partnership approach. Say, you want to advance STEM scores?
You betcha.
Maybe you don't want 20 master's degrees in here. Maybe you want is a
Maybe we want some STEM
3-year.
certifications, and here's what it looks like.
We're going to take a 3-year
need-
deal, and here's what
Well,
we'll do in the
and now
summer.
we're
and-
headed, now we're headed to some specific things. So for instance,
Yeah, that's a
just
tactic.
take mathematics. Mathematics alone. I think that elementary teachers should be experts in mathematics pre-K to grade 7. They're always going to teach students 2 years above their level of math if they're a 5th grade teacher. So if elementary teachers, if we need that kind of emphasis on mathematics, then we would be starting to offer, here's some additional certifications for elementary that you can go and get that will count towards your licensing piece, which will also get you more to be an effective teacher. on your evaluation system, but we have to get a caliber of high quality in place. And we don't have a mechanism to do that. It used to be the master's degrees. I actually think my master's degrees helped me be a better teacher. I don't know, we're going by some research that says that they don't. And some decision was made that master's degrees aren't the end-all to becoming a better teacher. It's really about what is it that we need in our profession to make sure that we're continuing to improve. So we almost need to identify some very key areas that we would want to focus on to actually bring about some change, some quality in leadership that we have going on, and identify some very specific areas. To me, we've got some really big topics here that I don't know that we can necessarily address in a good fashion, but if we narrowed it down to, here's a big need, and how do we get that to happen, perhaps we can, do a little better with it.
And I just want to make sure we don't lose too sight of the same thing for the principals too, because the biggest thing I hear right now, when I'm out in the field right now, the teachers, they're being evaluated, and a principal certainly can go in and see when things aren't going well. But that principal has an obligation under Indiana statute to then talk about what professional development needs to happen for that teacher to improve their efficacy, and that's where there is a major breakdown, because if that principal themselves, they may be able to identify it. I may be able to look and say, that's not right. But then when I have to pivot and I have to write into that growth plan what it is that I'm going to direct that teacher to do to improve, that's where I'm hearing concerns. And so I think training at their level around that, something delivered, and again, I don't know how that fleshed out, but we're just talking concepts today, so.
And some of that goes towards certifications they could get.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
You could do it.
All having a common, is there an understanding? Qualified teacher, qualified principal, in other words. But is there an understanding?
Yeah, I understand it, but I don't know if everybody does. And I might be right, but I have an understanding.
Well, highly qualified.
Right.
I have an uncommon one.
Outside of even this 5 people.
Well, highly qualified is pretty easy to attain because you got licensing pieces involved.
Right.
But highly effective is
Highly
part of our
effective,
evaluation system. So I think we're probably talking around the terms effective and highly effective.
That's what I'm kind of getting at right now, because eventually when we write this thing, I mean, we can write it as using language that you all choose, but you'd say, our teachers and principals will be certified as highly effective, definitions defined by the state or whatever, and then under that, you have different programs in there that would get you that certification called highly qualified. You've got this kind of growth among your clientele, or you've got teacher national board certification, because the research is quite clear that those numbers go way up if you get that. So under there, you can define some strategies that would enable a person to be called highly effective, not highly qualified, a la the feds, but highly effective per your definition of what that is. It could be a growth measure that would get you there. It could be a certain program that has good metrics around it, and you could define that, and then you're shooting to get X number of people to have that label called highly effective, as you all define it.
Before we go off to teachers, the only other thing I would say, and I don't know how to necessarily get it into a SMART objective, but I'm pretty convinced, I'm convinced technology is going to be, we're trying to teach a wider swath, if I may use the word, of humanity to a higher level than ever thought conceivable. And technology is going to have to be part of the solution, and we don't have how we're going to, I know how to do a bunch of input objectives on this, but an outcome objective where technology is more than a cool deal or a sideshow, but integrated to advance to highly talented people to a new level, and folks that heretofore we thought maybe couldn't achieve a level to get there. You're seeing it happen. It's very sporadic, and it's not under a, we don't have a think tank or a skunk works. I'm seeing some amazing things. And with technology, people can gain understanding 2 and 3 times over. Even difficult words can pop out, and they can give artistic descriptions of it, because if your vocabulary is not high, it cuts fluency and understanding and the speed at which you read. So there's somewhere in here, we would have to, if we want to be, if we went back to our vision, et cetera, talked about innovative, we would have to befriend technology in a way that's systematic, visionary, and it's tied to student learning, and not just, oh, everybody's got an iPad. Well, so what? You know, I mean, that's cute. I'm glad you can pronounce that, and I'm glad you tell everybody. But I want to know how it's embedded. And we will be a visionary and innovative board and get unbelievable results if we, not singularly, but with teacher training, with assessment, with curriculum, with outcomes, with engaging community, we'll have to use technology. It'll be across the board important, and I don't know how to state the objective, but we better get on it. We better find unique investments, and we better let it be our friend, because we can't get these achievements doing the same old thing over and over again.
I mean, the whole thing with flipped classrooms, you know, and all that kind of stuff today, research is out there that they work when teachers are trained.
And it's a whole new way to teach. Because frankly, what's happening, a lot of information, and you know who does it the best is our med school. They're watching their lectures and information, and when they get there, they do anatomy, or they do physics, or they do neuroscience, and they take apart, and they have case studies, and then a team of them says, well, if you get this, here's an indicator, what are you going to do with these indicators? Then you have to synthesize and make some decisions. Instead of a highly paid, I mean, these professors make a lot of money, just sitting there downloading information for 50 minutes is not nearly, but the preparation for that active learning class is very different, it's very difficult.
All the one-way communication happens offline, and when you bring people together, you take advantage of bringing them together. You bring them together to network, to
do
share,
work.
and to work. So the one way is done outside. But again, that just because everybody's got an iPad doesn't mean that's going to happen. You know what I'm saying? Because it takes traditional change. It's a strategy, yeah.
Well, it could, I would even be interested in trying to make it an objective, I just don't know how to do it yet. Because if we could measure some way, demand of ourselves that we measure some way how we can make investments in technology, advanced learning, and connected to that, and future investments connected to advanced learning, I wonder if we couldn't change the game. And it would probably be a good basis on which to go to legislators and foundations and other people and ask for more money for a technology investment. So that would be your homework. If you could make that an objective for us, I'd
And
like
if it would fit your vision, it would fit your vision.
it. Would fit our vision.
It would fit your vision, yes.
Technology is the gateway to knowledge, right? And so it's going to solve some other issues. We talked about equal access to educational opportunities. You think about rural areas in the state that don't have access to certain kinds of things. But I see technology permeating the whole system, just as we talked about literacy this morning, permeating the entire system. I think a project-based learning, Brad and I were talking about earlier today, is permeating the entire system. So we have 3 so far that should be permeating the entire system. How do we write those up into a strategic plan that we're sure that those and maybe some others will permeate the entire system? They're foundational to a successful system, as I see it.
Just like literacy, you know, is a seminal objective, but that doesn't belong to the English department. That belongs to everybody who touches children, wherever they touch children, and that's what comes out clearly in that Common Core stuff we looked at, or the standards, is that it's English, math, science, social studies. Everybody's job is to teach literacy. But the idea here is once you get it, where you choose to put it of your 3 goals, you're right, you could put it in any 3, but you could put it in number 1, you could put it in number 2. Wherever you put it, as long as you put it there and measure it, it's going to influence the whole system. You know what I'm saying?
So we wouldn't have to put it in each one. We could put
No,
it
you
in
don't
one
put it in-
place
don't-
and write it in such a way that it would impact
For example,
all 3.
to take where Dan was going with this, if you tried to put something in here in the one on educational leaders, which could be teachers and principals, everything, and you write in the one like that, you're gonna infuse, you know, technology into that system so that all educational leaders in Indiana, or 80% of them, are, you know, meet some standard by 2020. All right, if you write that in there, that's going to impact, if they in fact meet that standard, that's going to impact everything else. that they do.
Just to
So-
clarify, as I hear you, these goals are not silos.
No,
They are
Lord, no.
interactive, and some are going to cut across other areas. Even though we don't list it in all three, they are going to cut across, and it's part of a systems
Surely,
approach,
if you
right?
make, if you make your educational leaders' goals, that's going to help more kids be literate, because you're going to have better teachers working with better literacy, using technology and all that. So they all impact each other, but in order to measure it, you need to put it in a cubbyhole. You need to put it, you don't list it 3 times, you put it in, and it's a choice where you put
Helps
it.
you organize it like a cabinet.
That's it.
All the spices are important, but
You just put it in whichever one you think it makes the logical sense to do, but it's going to cross over the whole thing, including the stakeholders, by the way. I mean, once you start a technology initiative, it's going to open up a whole door for a whole lot of other stakeholders to get engaged, for example. So
Do you have an example of a state that used technology beyond, well, we have a computer in every classroom, therefore we're successful?
I don't know if
But
it's-
taking it to that higher level of using technology as a tool, is there an example?
Interesting example is Delaware that decided that they, excuse me, would automate their strategic planning process.
Right.
Put it online and make all of the balanced scorecard information in the entire state in a single database. So now you're talking about a state balanced scorecard tied to district balanced scorecards, tied to school balanced scorecards, all stored in the same technological system such that at any level you could pull up the information that you needed and make the comparisons and the connections right between them. And then they, tied that to a process where the conversations were going back and forth between the state and the districts and the schools about what do you need to make this happen. But, that was a way of using technology that was not in any of the educational technology playbooks. It was simple technology, but just a way to increase that piece of communication.
it could be, I'm just brainstorming, trying to get the objective. It could be, an objective is to have the State Department of Education be prepared and be a leader or be of great assistance, I don't know, in showing how technologies can be used to advance learning. Now, under there might be a research strategy. You'd have to set up the department, reallocate resources. But I would think as a state, if we wanted to get to innovation and get new results with the resource we have, we're going to have to engage technology. And so we'd have to create an objective where we could actually show schools and systems, et cetera, how you can use it, technology, advanced learning. And it would take a lot of energy and focus. But you talk literacy STEM or whatever, it's our friend. We're going to have to put it to work.
I'll say that technology is a great tool. I don't think we could ever say that a piece of technology actually was responsible for advancing learning. So I don't know how to say that in a different way. Technology is one of the tools that's used to integrate to be sure that we've got learning going on. It can expedite learning. Flipped classrooms can save time by having kids do things at the front end instead of at the back end when they get to class. Technology is a good way to advance information and use it as a tool for learning. But I don't know that we could say that specific uses of technology actually improve the level of learning. In fact, there's a lot of debate going on in the nation regarding that, where you've got classrooms who don't have technology that tend to perform just as well or better sometimes on assessments, and didn't have technology at all within their classroom pieces. So I just want to be careful. Technology use should be encouraged and should be integrated and should be part of what we do. I'm not sure we could measure it as a single thing that would impact
Yeah.
student achievement.
There's no doubt about that. And I think you might have been out of the room, but it is, a piece of technology will not suddenly teach somebody more. It could, by the way, but that isn't the system I'd want to look at. I'd want to look at taking a leadership role and finding out a way that absolutely, let's say you have an individual teacher who walks in a room with a piece of chalk and is unbelievable. Can they take that to another level with technology? Let's say there's an average teacher. Let's say there's a system that does a pretty good job, and with integration of technology, not as everybody gets one of these and we call it a day. I mean, really on how we teach and how we can deliver on snow days and how we can work in the summer and how, some people are visual learners and some people, if they watch it 3 times, they'll get it. Another guy watches it once fast and gets it. So it helps you with variation. It helps you with difference in learning. So I would tend to agree with you that we would never want to say, they spent $300,000 on technology and bought a bunch of these, and look what it did for learning. I would not evaluate it that way. I would go much more in depth, how it becomes hand in glove, because it's so powerful. It's so powerful.
It's really measuring the effectiveness of the teacher to use.
Right.
It's an integrated deal, but,
Right.
but the big gains, what we know about neuroscience and all, the big gains, I can't think of anywhere we, as a leader, because an individual district could do some of this, and a school can do some of it, but as a state and as this department and this board would mandate we become leaders in that, tap into the knowledge that's going on around the world and make that available, how using technology actually advances learning for variable learners, and show how to use it and set up the training and really drive that.
I think
That'd be an interesting objective.
I think those are some strategies that you might put in goal
I
number
agree with
1.
you. Yeah, I agree with you. Those really, I think, are
I'd like to write it in an
are
objective.
strategies that would support, and you could write them as objectives as well, but ultimately, the strategies are going to support teacher effectiveness, student achievement, and the stakeholder piece, if you think of those coming down from the goals. The question is if, and I don't think we've decided if we improve all the technology in the state, will that de facto lead to an improvement in student achievement and teacher effectiveness? And I
What
think
does that mean, improve the technology in the state?
take your pick. I mean, double spend more money on it, make sure we have
No, that's inputs.
computers in every place like that.
That isn't the objective I was thinking about.
Okay, all right. It's because it seems to me that ultimately the objective or the output is better teaching, better learning, and what you're saying is that either objective or strategy, we can decide which one later, but somewhere there's a strategy which says that the board needs to think about how these things relate to each other. How does the use of technology relate to student achievement? How does it relate to teacher effectiveness? And how can we find out about that and help the teachers be more effective in their use of technology? Support those technologies which are more effective, don't support the ones that don't prove to be effective, and sort of take that whole systems approach to saying what works, what doesn't work, what do we need, and look at that all as a piece. And that's really the process that we're talking about here. It's not so much something that you're going to probably capture in your document, but rather in the ongoing conversations around these goals and objectives is where that complicated systemic piece is going to come out.
Now, what we've done here is most of our conversation, if you look back over this, everything like the mentoring programs, using technology, the growth measures and all that, we're really spending a whole lot of time here talking about how we're going to measure, which is leading lagging indicators, or we're talking about, strategies. But if we go back to the idea that the original goal statement was what? What was the goal statement for this one?
Quality educational leaders.
We are going to provide the highest quality educational leaders. So really what we need to think about is, okay, and that's teachers and principals, we get that, and others. How do you know? I mean, what we need to think about in order to measure it, how do we know that we have a high quality principal? How do we know we've got a high quality, highly effective? How do we know we've got those learners? So we have to be able to think of the goal needs to be measured. We have to measure something that will tell us, yes, we have that. Yes, you are a highly effective teacher. Yes, you are a highly effective principal, and whatever. Now, clearly, indicators of that are going to be student growth data. Under your tutelage, things have come up and stuff like that. Do we have structures in place right now? Policies, procedures, practices, programs, tools that currently tell us where we are, so that we can measure that metric higher. I mean, what do we use right now to determine that we have educational leaders?
We're getting ready to have aggregate data on that topic.
Yeah.
So we're just collecting the last of the information, and then we will have, how many teachers are highly effective, and we'll have that on principals, and so we are going to have that here in Bowman.
All right, so you'll have those data, and you'll feel okay about those data, whatever metrics we use to collect those data, right?
Is that aggregate, or is that
Aggregate.
each individual? Do we need to go at the individual level or aggregate?
Well, I think you're going to have to set global goals. You'll probably have to aggregate it, but it will eventually trickle down to impact the individual. But those metrics are going to be like, how would they be stated, Glenn, when they come back?
We're just going to be having the numbers
Okay.
by school,
By school?
by district,
All right. So
of the number of teachers that are effective, highly effective,
And
needs
do you all
improvement,
feel pretty
ineffective.
comfortable as a board with the metrics that caused you to get to be labeled effective? You follow me?
I think my big idea, again, and I know I keep saying this, but I want to make sure that whatever we create isn't creating more work for districts.
Oh, definitely.
So I think that if we're going to make this work into what currently exists, then I like the idea of having maybe, whatever the number is, 90%, schools will maintain 90% or more teachers that are rated at highly effective within the.
Now, what
count.
currently, you don't know the metrics now, but are they that high right now, 90%?
I don't think we
No,
have
no,
the
we don't have
numbers.
that information
You don't have
yet.
that
And
information
the rubrics might look different from school to school, but bottom line is that the law mandates that they are categorized into, is it the four categories?
categories.
4 categories. So I like the idea of linking it together, so they're not having to come up with something entirely new. We're gathering the information that already exists.
And that's where I was going. If you have a metric that's out there right now that you feel okay about, and if you don't feel okay about it, the problem there is you have to fix that metric. But once you get.
Evolving.
That's evolving. So, but once you get the idea where you've already got a measure, then your goal can be, your objective could be, for example, we will increase by, or by 2020, if that's a number or whatever, 97%, 98% or whatever, or even 100% if you want to go there, of our teachers will be rated this, be rated highly effective or whatever. Then your strategies under that, and I agree with each one of you all have come up with some excellent strategies, but your strategies for under how that's going to happen, you could have a technology strategy that you put in, you could have a strategy, on preparation,
I'm comfortable with that. I think
You
that
follow
that encapsulates everything that we're.
And of course, the target will be, is that attainable? Well, it depends on where your baseline. When do you get those data?
They're due like this week, I
soon.
think, yeah. They're
Okay,
due.
so before we even maybe get through the next work sessions, we'll know what those baseline data are, right? So I think you could set a goal there. And now, is that for teachers and administrators?
I believe we're collecting both.
Supposed to be.
I know we're required to collect teachers.
Okay, so you might have to look at some way to collect those data on administrators, but at the same time, well, additionally, so once you do that, you have a baseline that you can grow, and how you grow to become more effective in that, you've got lots of great strategies, I think. Go ahead.
I have 2 others that I think are pretty important, and I don't know if you can write an objective, I hope so. One, how you compensate. I could make a case, and maybe it's just a short-lived objective, maybe. We do intensive research and find out how do you pay educators up and down the line. Should there be variation? If you go out and get a physics degree and you get paid the same as everybody else, does that make sense in a world where STEM subjects everywhere else are paid at a higher level, and we're trying to compete with business and industry, and we're paying the same? So I don't know what the answer is, but I would think one thing as a board, we want to make sure that the paradigm under which we teach, we're paying our administrators, teachers, everybody else in the business, in this profession correctly, the way that makes most sense, motivates, encourages, tracks. The second one that we didn't bring up, and this takes a little courage, what kind of training, education, systems of operating evaluation do give school boards? Often I think sometimes they're elected and they're highly motivated people, get them on, but what would be an objective around highly effective governance over education, because at the end of the day, if our system isn't moving forward, you have to put some onus on that board, that local board, because they hired the soup, and they gave the soup a lot of authority to do this and this and this. And we don't mention boards, and I think governance is a big, big issue in K-12 education.
Do you all have a requirement for professional development for your boards?
Not a requirement, but ISBA has a program.
Yeah,
So,
I was gonna mention- that's where I was going.
Two
Go ahead.
districts I served in central office, our board members were encouraged and incentivized to go back and actually attain their board. Right. I just don't know, I don't know how.
To write objective.
How that fits with
Well, write an
us.
objective, but then also too, how would this board enforce it on that board to say, you've got to go back and, I mean, what would the penalty be if I'm sitting a local board and I'm going,
I don't know, I'd have to think about the objective in terms of what we expect for performance, because at the end of the day, if you want to be accredited, we have some say in that.
okay.
Do you want your district taken over and put under, I mean, if excellent governance contributes to excellent education, then I think we ought to start speaking to it and have some kind of a program. We talked about educational leadership, leaders, and if you look at all the people involved, that's an interesting issue, and there's some research behind it, et cetera. I don't know it all, but I'd want to unpack that and see if there's an objective around it.
I know there are some states, including my home one, where if you are a board member, you are required to, it's the same model as teacher certification, you know, where after you've gotten your initial appointment, you have to get so many CEUs, or the requirement of that, in approved curricula. And in their case, the State School Boards Association actually governs the curricula. In other words, it has to be the courses that the board member has to take X number of hours to maintain their status, but the courses have to be approved by the State School Board Association. That's how it works in Virginia, okay? I'm not saying you'd do it that way, but there could be a scenario whereby you guys could indicate that all board members must maintain certification of whatever. Now, whether that's within your prerogative to do legally or whatever, I don't know. I'm not a lawyer, so, but in Virginia, they do it that way, and the state school boards is the control for the content. And they're measuring inputs, truly, as you're saying, measuring inputs, but that's as close as you can get, because they haven't figured out how to measure output of what a good board member is, you know, so they measure the inputs. In other words,
Yeah, but good board members oversee a system that has continuous growth and improvement, so maybe it's connected to accreditation. I don't really have the answer more than the
but that's an
topic.
interesting, we'll explore that. Maybe we can bring you back some ideas on that, because I'd have to do some homework on that one.
Sure, that's
Yeah.
great. I think it's right on, because that's where the leadership starts. And even as we look at take over schools and so forth and so on, I wonder sometimes, is it really a school issue? Or is it at the highest school board level issue? And I think in some cases that I know of, it might be a governance issue. And again, we don't want to be taking them over, but yet if there's a systemic problem at the highest level,
Let's not ignore it.
let's not ignore it. Let's take a look at it. So I'm thrilled by that
Well,
concept.
I don't know enough, to be honest with you. I don't know enough about nationally where that is, but can do some homework on that and bring back some ideas to you right now. That's best I can do, because I know some do it, by the way, but I don't think that's really honestly, I don't think it's measured on outputs. I think it's measured more on inputs.
Right.
Because they are elected board members. And so I think what happens, there's a lot of elected board members at the local level, and so people say, well, they're elected, they got their job, but at least we can require them to get training. You know, that's what happens.
And we can be transparent. I mean, there might be some indicators that we're producing information about schools. Maybe we produce some information about governance at the local level, good or bad. It could be good,
Yeah,
too.
we can't make schools be A schools.
No. But you got some good ideas up here, and I think the one that seems to maybe be the best umbrella we're shooting for so far, and we'll come back to that, is look at this idea of a goal around, an objective, around the idea of effective teachers and administrators, and see what we can do with that one. Yeah, educational leaders could be the board members too, under that one, if we could figure a way to measure it, you know.
Interesting.
Okay, all right, let's.
Check here from because we're now about a half an hour away from the start of the board meeting, which obviously we're having fun because time has flown, but it's played havoc with our schedule. So I'm going to suggest that there was a couple of things that we want to talk about next steps a little bit and about what's happening tomorrow, and we don't want to let that to fall off the edge of this
Were we
particular.
not getting to number 3 today?
Well, let's cycle back. I mean, if we run out of time.
For your focus groups?
No, no,
Just
no,
the
no, no.
objectives.
But what I wanted to do is at least tell you guys what we're looking at for the focus groups and the next steps and some other things like that. And then we can come back and work this until 2:30. Yeah.
And then kind of a similar exercise to look at the goal, onto what they think the board ought to be.
Funny you should ask. Don't look at the wall because you'll get vertigo. I got to move about 100 slides ahead. But yeah, this was a great thing, and you'll see it one of these days. Get to next step. See, this is how much we have not gotten to. Okay, next steps. All right. So obviously we're going to continue compiling this material that we've got. We haven't gotten as far ahead as we thought we were. I'm not sure we're quite at the stage yet of starting to put this into a balanced scorecard format. Looking at it and the next step, bringing everything together into one Excel spreadsheet that you can start to look at and decide whether you like that or, excuse me, want to move to a different formats. But that's something that we can leave going ahead. We've got to keep this developmental work going on. This is the piece that we really have to think about in terms of how we strategize for the next meeting, because there's a lot of work to be done to bring these identify these goal teams and bring them together. And it was one of the things that we were hoping to spend some time talking about today. We certainly will not get to that. So it may well be that we've got to think about whether we need to roll the schedule back yet again to keep going. And again, you know, we're here to help you guys do this, and you are way ahead. You're working very quickly. So you shouldn't feel bad if we have to do this. We just have to figure out how we're going to logistically make that happen. But it's the most important thing for us itself is that this process is good and that the product is good. And we will figure out between us how we're going to make that happen if it takes, you know, hopefully not the rest of our lives. But so this is a piece that I think we probably can't get in place by a month from now. Maybe we can, we'll see, but it's going to be tough because we have to have some conversation and a lot of leadership from the superintendent about who some of these people should be, because they're coming largely from her organization. So we need that sort of thinking to go on. More directly, we have scheduled tomorrow, and do you have, Ann, do you have those participant lists that I can give? Okay, mail them around. All right, so we've got a list. There was a list of organizations that you got in a document the last time, and they've invited 2 representatives from each of those organizations to come to one of 2 sessions tomorrow. And what we want to do there is show them just the very highest level piece of this plan. So my proposal would be that we show them mission, vision, and goals, and they're the shortened goals that we've come to now, because I think we're pretty much not controversial about what those are. And then we have some, you know, a really important goal is to get these people involved in this process, to make them feel that they're bought into the process at an early stage. And so we're at an early stage here to elicit input on the plan. These are very important messages that Dan had suggested that we want to make when we introduce this and when we talk to them, is that we're looking to create partnership here to work effectively to benefit Indiana's children, and that we really need cooperation and hard work out of this entire group, and that it's not just one organization or another, but the entire organization put together. So that would be sort of the introductory remarks that we'll make. Give them a 5-minute introduction to balanced scorecard planning. Walk them through the mission, walk them through the vision, walk them through the goals. And at that point, we're going to break the groups in half. Harvey and I will each lead one half of the groups, and we'll lead them through 3 focused question sessions. First one is simply to ask, you know, what do you think of the plan that you see? Give us some feedback on the plan. What resonates with you? Probably not going to talk about what you don't like, but we're going to talk about what you like. And the way we're going to schedule this is to have essentially a 10, 15-minute conversation with the group at large, but also ask each organization to fill out a response sheet where they answer these questions from the standpoint of their specific organization. So it's not just a matter of their personal opinion, but, you know, what is the school board organization? What do these other organizations feel about the plan. And then these second two questions really are to emphasize the point that we're talking about a partnership here. And a partnership flows two ways. So the first question is, you know, what can we ask for you people to do? And we're going to give them some examples. You know, they can play roles in implementation, they can help in communication, they can help in publicizing the plan, they can help in fleshing out the strategies of the plan. Some of the members of these organizations may be on the goal teams. So as we want to get is their input on where do they see themselves fitting into this plan, how do they see themselves helping implement it. And then the second part, which is the other half of the partnership question, is are there things that could be done that would make it easier for your organizations to help support this plan? So get some information about not necessarily barriers, but what things would help them be more effective partners in this piece to improve education for children in Indiana. So that's our structure at the moment. We think that 3 questions is about all we can get asked in 2 hours. And we want to get them to talk among themselves a little bit, but we also want them to give us specific feedback about their feelings about the plan. So how does that sound as a structure to everybody?
Question, how do you envision bringing back their input to us? What's that going to look like?
Well, it'll be similar to what we've done in terms of coalescing you put it in a report and bring it back. We have 2 people to record minutes at each one of these conversations, so we'll collect that information, we'll collect all the feedback from the feedback forms and put it all together in some sort of ultimate document report that you all will receive about what happened in those 2 sessions tomorrow.
So you're looking at a 1 or 2 page document that sets forth themes, or are you going to give us all the comments?
We're going to give you all the comments and try and boil them down to an executive summary.
Great.
You know, what we've done in the past. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So if I was a member of this focus group, and I think I would do okay looking at the mission and the vision, but when I got down to the goals and I didn't see anything really fleshed out in terms of objectives, I'd be going, ensure that all students in Indiana learn. I'm not sure they're going to see the plan. I mean, are they going to, I think they would spend their time doing what we've been doing today. What does that mean? What would we like you to focus on? Is that what you're really going to have them do?
No, what we'll try and do is flesh out these goals a little bit. I mean, I will try and give them a little bit of understanding about the conversation that went on behind them, but not to draw it out too far, but try and help them to understand what you all mean by help all the students learn and give them a little bit of input. You're absolutely right. You're making a good point. There's 2 reasons, obviously, that we can't bring them objectives. There's a logistical reason that we don't have objectives, but the other side of the coin is that their feedback is going to help inform the objectives level of this conversation to a certain extent. Strategies as well, but I think objectives input at this point would be helpful.
This is not their various groups last time to give us input.
No, not at all.
And I understand your concern, Superintendent, I agree with it, but the other thing, I think we ought to make that clear with them. I also think there's a process value and a substantive value in having people reflect and give critique of the vision and mission, because it creates context and poses some larger questions that are larger motivators of where we want to be. And so at this stage, if you can, you have to think about the kind of questions we're talking about, being good educators here. That'd be what kind of questions would elicit talk about the vision and mission to see if there's a resonance, a common understanding, maybe even some suggestions.
No, I do share your concerns to a certain extent because I have to get up in front of these people. But, you know, I think that we can't share a lot more detail with them at this point without being even more confusing. And at the same time, their input at this stage, I think,
I'm
will
very
be
interested
useful.
in hearing what they would have to say. You know, what would be your #1 priority to ensuring that all students in Indiana learn? You know, for instance, we came up with literacy as a basic thing that is needed to be sure kids learn in every subject.
Yeah.
So I'd be interested to see, you know, where they go with some of these.
Yeah, and I think Dan's point is very well taken. You know, we've been saying all along that what you need is a regular process to do this. And this is the first of 3 sessions that are actually planned in Ann and Claire's initial schedule that they gave you last time. There's a couple other sessions after this one. This is just the first. But the other thing I would like to say to these groups is that this is the beginning of an ongoing process. And you can expect to have this happen on a regular basis, that you'll be called back together to get more details of the plan and to be involved in the implementation of the plan and to keep the conversation going and keep that partnership going. I think it's a lot of the theme that I want to put in.
Take them something that looks like something that where you've already gone too far down. Well, why'd you ask us to come in if you've already done this much? And maybe you've got all of our objectives already fleshed out and they're smart objectives. Well, you've already done, you're not going to back away from those. I mean, that's sometimes people come in and they feel that way. At this point, I think the other thing is we force them to do what you all had to do today, which isn't easy. It's productive struggle. And I think productive struggle is good in this process, because even with that group, if I threw out a mantra to a bunch of educators and said, okay, our goal is that all kids will learn. If you were sitting on that board and you had that as your goal, what would be the clarifiers you would put under that? You know what I'm saying? What would you see is important to measure under that? And it would be interesting to see some of that might be good fodder for you all to come back when you would say, oh, I hadn't thought of that, or I hadn't thought of this goal, or I hadn't thought of that. And when we ask them about under the 3 different goals, when they get to the one on educational leaders, I'm sure they're going to get at the idea, well, now, educational leaders, are they just talking about principals? And that engages that conversation. But then when we say teachers being leaders and principals and superintendents and boards being leaders, well then, okay, then what would you put in that bucket? I mean, what would be some things? So hopefully this will help you guys crystallize some ideas as well. So the more I think about it, I think not giving them too much leadership and seeing where they come in might be a value. Yeah.
Y'all are pretty much comfortable with what we're doing there. All right. So then I guess the question becomes, this was our initial plan, was to try and get the work on the goal team meetings. I think we need to think about this. Harvey and I need to think about this, because I think we'd be rushing you a little bit possibly to get to that point. So
That meeting's just with this group, or is it
that
with the
meeting
whole,
is, well,
the big group?
we're assuming that it's just the 6 of you.
Okay.
And then that's the other thing that we're not 100% sure of, is if we start to plan these continuing sessions out, are we continuing to work with just the 6-member committee, which is, again, decisions you all need to make. So we need guidance from you all on how to do that, as we need guidance about what we should do with the rest of the time today. So we've got about 20 minutes left. I can understand that you all might want to have a breather before your board meeting. Obviously, we can't stop at 2:30 and expect the board meeting to start at 2:31, so.
Two
what would
things
you like to do?
I'll recommend is that certainly we have to take this to the full board at this point. I think there's enough substance here. We ought to have a board discussion. Look at the timeline and recommend some stuff to the committee, will you? You guys can think it through, and then we can critique it, maybe even have a phone conversation. And then I would suggest the rest of the time today, maybe we look at this goal 3 and just start throwing up a few objectives and see what people think. Would that be good? And we'll get a 5-10 minute break at the end. So that means we have about 10 minutes, and then we get a 10-minute break, then it's back to work.
Okay?
Is that all right?
No. Good. Okay. The third one, goal, if you recall our truncated version. Anybody remember the truncated version?
Increase the involvement and support of all Indiana stakeholders.
Right. So that's the one. Now, we'd be talking about, again, not how we're going to do it, but what would you want to measure? What would be some measure to determine that 5 years from now we have grown. We are here. We are now cutting edge 5 years from now. What would you want to measure relative to stakeholder involvement with local boards and
Active partnerships going on.
right, active partnerships, formal partnerships at that point?
I think we should research, develop and implement, of course you do some research, some kind of survey, quantitative and possibly qualitative, every district in the state. We could do it at the state level too, by the way. This board could do it with the state chamber board. We could pick a select and see how parents, starting with parents survey, question like, if you want to be accredited school, you have to do these surveys once a year. And do you feel welcome in your school? We know that if parents are engaged and if the community is engaged, the school has a better chance of being successful by a lot. The research is clear. So could we do an annual survey? Again, I want to watch how much work we give districts because they're pretty busy right now. But is there a consistent one that you could do some compare analysis? Again, not to find fault, but to help people improve. And if your parents are telling you they don't feel very welcome there, then sit down and say, how do we go about this? Do the people in this district, do the business leaders and the mayor and I don't know what I don't know if there's a best practice out there, but I would like this board to go in and see if there's a way we could get annual data for our state, for our districts, for schools about engagement and how people think and feel about their school might be a great tool.
And there is a precedent for that, by the way, and I can share with you some of them, but some of the places we work with have, you know, that the requirement is by this time, all districts will have at least 80% of positive approval ratings on a school effectiveness survey to be defined, you know, to be defined by the state or whatever. In other words, there's a list of approved documents in some places where here are 10 documents that we've looked at and vetted by our research department that are good models. And you can use one of those 10, or if you have an 11th or 12th you want to submit to our review, you submit to our review for your local use. And then the idea is everybody gives that annually and you try to get to X percentage approval rating on that, you know. And they're usually pretty good documents. I mean, there's a lot of them out there. We could give you a list of them, you know, because it doesn't have to be one. In other words, it could be a list. But the idea is you collect those data and report them annually or however you choose. So that is an option. Yes?
One item we spoke about at our last session also was the development of a family literacy program. So it's putting some sort of quantitative measure on involvement or occurrences, but some element of family literacy.
Family literacy program, yeah. And that could go into the literacy strategy as
It
well.
absolutely could.
To go into there as a literacy strategy, but it would also, it crosses over. Like you said, David, these aren't mutually exclusive. You have to choose what bucket you want to put that in. It's up to you.
And I think our plan is stronger when they do cross through.
Yeah, it is good, yeah.
Sometimes when we think of stakeholders, we think of people involved in schools, families, and so forth. I think we need to look more externally. So people within the community who may not have children in school, but are taxpayers in that community. And so somehow addressing that is point one. Point two, I'm trying to distinguish between input measures and outcome measures. And the first one, at least, and maybe several of them are more input rather than outcome. And I'm not sure if you can give us an example of another state who has done an outcome measure on stakeholder other than participation. Anyone can count the agreements and increase the number of people participating, but what?
Well, an outcome measure would be something like, you know, 80% of those surveyed have rated your school district or as effective or higher on this survey. I mean, that is an outcome, you know, now it's based on a whole lot of inputs, you know, whatever their relationship was with the school, but that's an outcome. You know, now it's more difficult when you look at things like partnerships and things, because there you're really looking at quantity of partnerships, but you have a difficulty to gauge the quality of the partnership, you know, from your level. You know, it's difficult to gauge that. But in some cases, in these areas, it goes back to a conversation we were having, I guess, all of us earlier, about the fact that is the school an orphan or not? You know, and sometimes just going to the point where we at least are assuring ourselves that there are no orphans out there. That's where you're looking at the participation thing. And we're really not trying to measure the quality in that case. We're just measuring that there is engagement.
Okay, and assuming that engagement equals a better school in some way. And there's some research, as Dan pointed out, to indicate that. But there's different levels of participation.
Right.
As you know, and so hopefully, do you think we'll be able to get at some of that qualitative side of it?
The only way to do that, in other words, if you said that there would be X, that all school districts would have X number of partnerships meeting certain quality guidelines, established by the state. And then you try to establish some quality guidelines in relative to partnerships. And there's some out there, but it would basically be saying, you know, if McDonald's giving everybody a Happy Meal, you know, that passed the test, that may not qualify for your quality partnership, you know, so.
Okay, good.
I don't know, this is a challenge.
Yeah.
And I don't know if we can make this an objective, but I'd be interested in the state board taking initiative to appoint, charter a STEM council in the state that would give us annual feedback on STEM performance, design, quality. Might include deans of math science schools talking about the students coming. How we get that to an outcome, maybe the objective is that we form it and that we get annual assessments from people who are out in the field in STEM and say, are we well aligned? It seems to be in line with the governor's vision of having higher ed, workforce development, K-12 work together. But I think until we systematically, consistently interact and engage with the STEM, and there's a pretty good group in this state, with up north and Cook down in Bloomington, et cetera, and of course in Indianapolis. We're legitimate STEM state. It's not just another chest thumping exercise. Until we formalize and interact with that group, how we're doing and where they see things going and how we ought to be adapting and have some dialogue, it'll probably hard to be a national leader. So that may be a way to put that in an objective.
I mean, you could, again, go back to that idea. You've got to add some qualifiers. So it'd be the idea, you know, that 80% of our school districts will have a STEM advisory board which meets quality control guidelines as determined by the state. Well, then you indicate what that is, and so that it's not just thrown out there, but you've said this is what it would take to meet that criteria, and then we want 80% of the people to meet that criteria. I mean, you could do that on one like this. But again, in most of these, if you're going to get into the quality, then you have to define it, because there's not a preconceived concept out there already of what is a quality partnership, what is a quality, you know, linkage or whatever. But you could define it. There's no reason you can't, just like you define licensure and you define many other things. You know, yeah.
I guess I'm going to what we measure has to have an effect on students. And I don't see a measurement here yet that I feel good with that's going to actually do that. So I think it's quite easy, in fact, to get partnerships. Did they have an impact on students and their learning is another whole factor. So, you know, I think it's easy to do that, and I'll say it's easy to put students in AP courses. It's easy to put students in, you know, a lot of variety of programs that we might want, but is that what you want to measure? Just the number of increase that are actually participating?
No, that's what we're saying.
And I think
No.
you're right. You made a good
But
point.
I want it back to
You
the
hit the nail on the
students.
head.
I want it to have an effect on instruction in the classroom. That's why the partnerships are there, or that's why the support pieces are there, and that's where you get the buy-in.
And that's why I was saying that on each one of these, you're almost going to have to define what does it mean to have a quality partnership, and if there are linkages in the classroom and things that would have to be a part of it to count. You have to define what those linkages are. You know what I'm saying? In some case, now I know you're measuring inputs, but the idea is on these, when you get to outputs, sometimes it gets this gets crossed over then output-wise with also your quality teaching and all that other stuff, yeah.
And superintendent's right on. I think that's what we're trying to grapple with. However, now everybody's got their research, as you know. You can get research to back, well, not anything, but close to it. There's research on schools that are the communities in the school and the schools in the community, and they seem to be thriving. And then there's some further research that peels back the onion and says, well, what is that? What kind of engagement is there? What kind of involvement? We're going to have to do some work and figure that out. But I think we could actually, if we pick the right areas, I wish I had them right now in front of me, but the schools, community schools movement and some of those, they have some pretty good research that shows.
Community and schools.
Yeah, that shows that it actually advances learning, support for the education. The students and teachers say they're not alone. They see the community actually cares what they're doing. That's a big motivator. So it would make sense, those things together, if we designed it right, we could actually measure it, and it should follow the research. If we find it doesn't, we had a good objective and we'll have to adjust it. But I think we could parse this down and figure it out, because there's just no doubt, like our schools that we had to intervene with, it was pretty clear in all the reports, we had an awful lot of consultants go to, they were isolated, orphaned, kind of detached. The community wasn't in the school. The parents were not in the school. We know that connection. So I just agree 100% that it's very difficult, but I think there's probably a way to get there.
Well, I think you're always different data to look at. It's never going to be a question of does the school have partnerships or not, but do schools which have partnerships show different performance
What kind, what's
curves,
quality?
and disaggregate that piece and ask the question, in a classic sort of research way, what are the primary factors that are causing this set of schools to be here and this set of schools not to be, and then build your interventions and your supports and things like that around those proven facts. I think that's what I'm hearing from you, is that you're looking for that as part of the process of what always goes on here. And again, remember, that's part of our process, is we say, we take a best guess at where we're headed, but we measure progress and see if our theories are correct, constantly testing our theories about this so that we make sure that we get the right things done.
I agree with you. It's difficult. We would have to work hard at it.
I have a question too. It's more of a process question, but it's kind of the same thing. But is it reasonable that as we start talking about specific strategies related to the concepts, that will give way to the metric that ends up going into the objective? And the reason I say this is, if I was looking at that concept, I'd say, yes, how does that come back to students? Well, we're all thinking different things. I'm thinking over here, career technical education. I'm thinking about business partnerships, for internships, for bringing education alive, and a CTE model, but others may not be thinking about that. So how do we, I'm asking, and when we get into the strategies, is it reasonable that the objective will unfold more, or do we have to actually say, no, this is the objective and have the metric first and define strategies to hit that? I guess that's where I'm
We want a
back and
synergy
forth.
between that.
Okay.
It's a conversation. It's like, the way you would do any sort of thing. You start a task and you learn in the process of doing the task that certain things aren't
Yeah,
working.
Superintendent Ritz is saying we need to put CTE up there, and I would agree with that too. And then the other thing too that was referenced over here just a second ago, I think I'd like to see up there too, is this whole idea of social service engagement or something around that lines. We were talking earlier about attendance, and it just seems to me like if there's a way to, I don't know if there's a way, if we could flesh it out more, but we talk about attendance rates. I'd like to talk about how we attack chronic absenteeism and get the systems to react faster. The schools tend to see it first, and it just kind of sits there and builds and builds and builds, and then it seems like the systems finally react. But by then, you got a student's missed 45 days of school. You're behind the 8 ball on the achievement side of it. So again, until we start fleshing out strategies, I don't know what that means in terms of an objective or a metric. My gut tells me that's a stakeholder.
Your metrics will become crystal clear when you get strategies. You start articulating your strategies. The metrics piece may be, have to collect some different data, but it'll come out.
I mean, another way to put it is that we're in an age where there's plenty of data. That's the good news. Obviously, we get overwhelmed by it sometimes, but it's not unreasonable for you all to start off with a set of 8 straw lagging indicators and toss certain ones because they don't seem to correlate to the things that you're looking at. So it's a lot of flexibility
We're
there.
also in a time for break. We're in an age for data and a time for break. Thank you, sir. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks.
Great job today. Good job, Harvey and Chris. Thank you very
This
much.
is a really large study, Lexile study that was done that really talks about, and it really hasn't changed too much over time, and, even
Excellent.
Lexile pieces.
Great,
So I just
great.
wanted to let you know how far below some of our pieces are.
Wow.
to get it.
Incredible, thanks. Very helpful.
This is for me. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Where did you get this?
This is plastic, Metametrics. Did